Hey everybody, Jennifer Maggio here. So excited that you joined the Life of a Single Mom's YouTube channel. We have some great content. I hope you'll go back and look at some of the exciting authors and speakers that have been with us, and today is no exception. I have with me Shannon Ethridge. Now, if you don't know Shannon, I don't know why you wouldn't. She has written 22 books. It is amazing what God has done through her ministry, shannonethridge.com. You can check out her information. She's an author and life coach and speaker. But one of my favorite books that you wrote was Every Woman's Battle. And I don't know if I should say favorite or not, guys, because it was kind of, there were some tough things in there. But at the same time, I think it was great.
I get a lot of comments along those lines of women like, that book totally changed my life, but then they recognize that because it was about sexual integrity, it's like they don't want to confess too much. But it really is every woman's battle. We called it that for a reason.
It is. So if you want to know more about healthy sexuality and all of the nuances of that journey, you definitely want to check Shannon out. And then I also have with me Nicole Smith. If you guys have been part of our Single Moms Conference in the past, you may have met Nicole. Nicole has an exciting ministry, Game Day Prep 365. So you'll want to check that out at gamedayprep365.com. And she is just has so much energy and so much excitement. Her energy is contagious. So ladies, thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you.
So we're talking about what can be a tough topic, forgiving an ex. We're talking about forgiving an ex. So first of all, if ladies are even watching, because even opening it up to recognize that you need to forgive can be a challenge, because what happened sometimes was not your fault.
Right.
And you didn't deserve it. Your kids didn't deserve to not have dad around. And so when you begin to take that journey of unpacking why I should forgive, especially when he didn't deserve to be forgiven, because that's where we are, right? That's where we get. How do you even begin? Shannon, I know some of your personal story has been that of going through a divorce after 26 years.
Right. And that was as much of a shock to us as it was to everybody else, just the recognition that what we have had is unsustainable. And people always want to know more details behind that, and that's really all the details that I choose to give, because I'm not interested in throwing people under the bus. I don't want to fuel my own anger and bitterness and disappointment over it. I tell people, no one is more devastated when a marriage fails than the husband and the wife whose marriage failed. And so one of the things that I've had to really focus on is that my struggle isn't against flesh and blood. My problem was never my ex-husband. My problem was the struggles that we had that seemed insurmountable, and that ultimately, I used to really judge people for the whole irreconcilable difference thing. I used to think, well, if they just had come to see me as a life coach, I could have helped them reconcile that difference. But there truly are sometimes irreconcilable differences where it's just not healthy for the couple to keep forcing the relationship when it's eroding at each other's self-esteem and mental health and emotional health and even physical health. And so just focusing on the fact that I can be angry at issues and struggles and irreconcilable differences, but my ex-husband is a child of God, and he is the father of my children. And I just choose not to hold that against him personally, hoping that he will give me the same grace. Because, you know, when two people are looking at a failed marriage, it's like an accident that happens and two people are on two different street corners. You see something totally different from your own street corner. And so my goal has always been to just keep it as amiable as possible. And I don't know if there's such a thing as a classy divorce, but that was my goal. I just didn't want to be the ugly mudslinging that we see in the tabloids and things of that nature. I just don't think that that's necessary.
I don't either. I don't think anything can come out of it. And Nicole, I was thinking about, you know, with your story, having, you know, your child's father to die, and you guys were divorced at that time, but still, you know, number one, I would ask, did you struggle with that forgiveness aspect, particularly since, you know, eventually he passed away? And what did that journey look like for you guys?
So it definitely was a struggle, because I was really young, and I just didn't understand, like, if, you know, we make these vows to get married, and then 9 months in, you're kind of like, I don't want to do this anymore. Like, who does that? Like, what do you mean you don't want to be married anymore? And so having to go through this whole journey and getting to the point where I'm going to be raising my daughter by myself, by me not forgiving him, it was giving him the power, right? And then that was translating to my daughter. And so I had to come to grips with the fact, okay, yes, this was done to me. Yes, it was undeserved in my point of view. But am I going to allow that person to have that kind of power over me?
Yeah.
And I decided to take my power back and decided to let it go. What's the Frozen song? Yes, that's it. See, we're right there.
Nobody can hear "Let It Go" without singing that song.
Exactly. But I realized that it was so important, because otherwise, whenever I would be talking to my daughter about her father, if I didn't, she would see that tension. She would see that, and then that's going to breed. If that's what she sees, then what am I setting her up for in the future for whatever? Is she going to think that if she does something wrong, that mommy's not going to forgive her for it?
That's interesting.
So,
That's good.
That's really
Gotta
well.
preach.
What about this idea as well, that as you're walking through forgiveness and they don't deserve it. So I heard this woman share her story not long ago, a woman at our church, and she was talking about how she'd had a fantastic marriage for 10 years, like the best marriage. And then he became addicted, and it was a secret addiction.
Beyond her control.
Yeah. And then he became extremely abusive, and just it went to the most extremes you can imagine, and he abused her daughter, and the list kind of goes on and on. But she was sharing her story of forgiveness and how God had allowed her to be able to walk through forgiveness with him and everything that he had done, physically assaulting both she and her daughter. And I just was so moved by her story, because I thought it's easy for us to forgive when maybe there's infidelity. Not easy, but it's easier, I should say, to forgive when there's infidelity than when there's been abuse, or whenever there has been other levels of trauma like addiction, and it took over the family, and all the money was spent, and all these things. And so the acceptance that he deserves forgiveness is a really difficult one, because it's not about him necessarily deserving it, but it's recognizing he's a child of God.
right.
That's so profound.
Yeah. One of the most powerful stories of forgiveness I've ever heard is one of the ladies who went through my Blast mentorship program. She wrote a book, and she speaks so eloquently on the story about how her ex-husband had an addiction problem and was under the influence when he was bringing their son back to her after having him for a weekend, and there was an accident, and the little boy was killed. So how do you forgive your ex-husband for being under the influence and allowing your son to be killed? But the stories are such a powerful one in that she said she realizes it wasn't him. It was the drugs.
Yeah.
It was the alcohol. It was the substance. But removing all of those things and loving the person for the broken person that they are, that takes God type power. That is not something that we can do in our own humanness.
Yeah. So let's talk about some quick tips on how to actually do that. What does the process of forgiveness look like that's so very difficult?
You want to go first?
We don't know. We're trying.
I think for me, and I've kind of mentioned it before, is acknowledging and allowing myself to hurt. That's the very, very first thing. And not to like swat it away like it wasn't really a thing. And then after that, knowing that I have two choices. I can either wallow in it or I can choose to move forward. But I still have to acknowledge first that what they did hurt, and I'm allowed to hurt, and it's okay to hurt, and I have the right to hurt. But am I going to walk in that right to hurt, or am I going to give up that right for healing to move forward?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I would echo that. I would say that just give yourself a season of grief, because it is the death of a dream when a marriage fails. It's not something that you're going to just shed a few tears over and move on and have a new boyfriend next week like we did in high school. This is something that you're going to grieve for a long time, and that's okay. And I would also encourage people not to rush into major life decisions like I'm going to go get a new husband or a different house or rack up credit card debt with a new wardrobe or whatever. That those are the decisions that people really find themselves burying themselves deeper when they try to cope with their grief that way, by trying to medicate the pain instead of just taking the time to heal the pain.
Yeah, and guarding your heart and your tongue,
Yeah.
I think is also probably a really key component. Because I heard a pastor one time talk about your children are an extension of that man as well as yourself.
Right.
And when we say things repeatedly, even though we don't necessarily, the intent, of course, is not to hurt the child, we are. we are, whether they articulate that now or whether it comes out in behaviors later.
Right.
Being mindful of what you're speaking out loud is critical. And one thing that I also think is really important is getting involved in a single mom support group, because what we see happen is that you can see someone that's been on the journey you're on and she's a little bit further down the road than you, and it gives you a mile marker, that hope of saying, well, if she can forgive him for that, then
Right.
surely I can learn to forgive what I'm going through at some point. There's hope. I'm not there yet, but there's hope that I'll one day get there.
Right.
And also understanding, yes, it's a process and it's not something that's going to happen overnight, and it's okay. You know, one day you're literally going to wake up and you're not even going to think about the person anymore. You're not even going to, it's just going to kind of magically happen. So if it doesn't happen right away, it's okay. It's a process. You have to work at it daily.
I don't think turning around and helping other people who are further behind you
Yes.
really helps you feel further
Yes.
down the road.
Yes, what
Yes.
an excellent point. This idea of
Yes.
service above self, that we know the scripture teaches all the time, looking for someone else you can serve. That's amazing. Ladies, thank you so much for your thoughts today and for your wisdom. God bless you. And God bless you for joining us. We know that there are many amazing stories to come as you learn to forgive your ex. God bless you.